Welcome to the White Collar Insider. Join your host, David Benowitz, as he discusses all things white collar, federal criminal defense, and beyond.
I want to welcome Gene Rossi to our podcast. He is currently of counsel at Carlton Fields, where he handles white collar matters and government investigations. Before he went to the law firm, he was at the Department of Justice for 27 years. Including a stint at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia that began in 2001. He handled 65 jury trials, which I believe was a record for that office, and did so much work there that they named a conference room the Gene Rossi War Room. And I just have a personal experience with the Gene Rossi War Room. The only time I've ever considered committing, which I believe this would be a federal crime, was I had a meeting that was taking place in the Gene Rossi War Room, and there was a replica of the gopher from Caddyshack in a little box on a shelf there. And so I literally, that was almost irresistible for me. I'm not sure if someone didn't plant that there for me to potentially steal so they could then charge me, but I thought that was a perfect addition to the Gene Rossi War Room.
That was in the Gene Rossi War Room?
That was in the Gene Rossi War Room. Yes, the gopher from Caddyshack. Yes.
Oh, I thought it was the talking bass. Remember the bass that would talk? Right. We also had that.
From the Sopranos? You got it from the Sopranos? You mean from the Sopranos?
Yes.
Big Bad Billy Bass?
Billy Bass. That was in the War Room. Yes.
I don't remember that. I was just transfixed. I was transfixed on the gopher. So Gene, I mean, you spent almost 30 years at DOJ. How are you finding the transition to the defense side?
Seamless, and I'll tell you why. When I was a prosecutor for 27 years, I obviously took my job seriously. At least I hope I did. And I used to take pride in saying to my young attorneys that I trained hundreds of them, that, being a prosecutor, it's not about trophies on the shelf, notches on the belt, accolades, scalps. It's about making sure you're putting on a good case, but you're very conscious of the rights of the defendant. Because, if the defendant doesn't get a fair trial, that says a lot of negative things about you. So I kind of played defense attorney a lot of times where I erred on the side of caution. I tried to make sure that the defendant got a fair shake, he or she. Now I'm representing mostly white collar. I have a few drug cases, violent crime cases, and I find it very rewarding. I will say this. The only downside is when I sense that a prosecutor or law enforcement official is doing some shady stuff, either lying before a grand jury, presenting false evidence, withholding exculpatory evidence, I go full bore. I have filed a lot of motions, especially in Albemarle County, and they've been very tough motions. So that's the only downside is I know when I'm being punked. I know when they're pulling a fast one on me. And I got to tell you this, at the state level, there needs to be a lot of training, because I don't get the sense in most of the states that these state prosecutors, not all of them, but a significant minority, I don't think they know the difference between Brady, Giglio, and their obligations under the Constitution. That is a sad reality. It really bothers me.
Yeah. So why do you think it's a downside that you know about that?
It goes to what I said, that when they try to punk me, right, and say that they don't have any information that's exculpatory, helpful to the defendant, I know that they're not being truthful.
Right.
And I can't get into the details of what I've been doing lately, the last 3 years, but when I see that what a detective perjures himself in front of a grand jury based on evidence that basically was created, a false narrative, sort of like what happens from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I can sense that as a former prosecutor.
Right. Well, that is a great, sort of skill to have as a defense lawyer as well. And I think you develop it. It may take a little bit longer. For myself, having never been on the prosecution side, it may take a little bit longer to develop, but it does develop.
Yeah.
So I wanted to turn to the catastrophic events of last week. Yeah. The act of domestic terrorism, and as a former prosecutor, let's say you were the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. What would you do?
The first thing I would do is I would staff a grand jury investigation, and there has to be a grand jury investigation that looks at everybody who was involved during the execution of that mob insurrection, but work backwards. How were they organized? How were they enticed? How were they encouraged? And this could go back to November 3rd or November 4th of last year, because the seeds of that insurrection that occurred on January 6th began on November 3rd, November 4th. If you go back, you guarantee it. And what I would do, the first thing I would do, is I'd make sure that the people who staff that massive grand jury investigation, it's going to be massive, they have to be career prosecutors who've tried more than one case.
Sure.
All right. That always helps. Number two, they have to have incredible integrity. And number three, as much as you can possibly get it, they have to be apolitical. And as you know this, David, you worked with hundreds of federal prosecutors and state prosecutors. There are thousands of prosecutors that have a lot of integrity and are apolitical. Have they given $20 to a candidate here and there? Sure. But are they relatively apolitical? Yes. And I would put about 6, warriors for justice on that grand jury investigation and just let them go. I wouldn't put my finger on the scale. I wouldn't try to micromanage. I'd maybe get a report, every month, but I would let them make the charging decisions and investigate subjects and targets. And I got to say this, the charges are so egregious. We're talking sedition, 20-year maximum, insurrection. We're talking treason. We're talking conspiracy. We're talking RICO. I don't think the felony murder rule applies. You work for the best public defender's office in the country, DC. Okay, I don't think the felony murder rule applies because the enumerated crimes are arson, sabotage, child abuse. I don't think it fits. But the RICO charge could fit. And the enterprise, ready for the enterprises for RICO? The White House,
right? The
Trump campaign, Trump's committee that he set up after November 3rd to grift the American public to get money, they would be the enterprises. And I'll guarantee you this, if you get their emails, their social media, their text messages, talk to witnesses, there was collusion, coordination, and a conspiracy among the White House, the Trump organization, the Trump campaign, and these Proud Boy groups, these white supremacist groups. This was just not an accident that they marched 1 or 2 miles from the eclipse in front of the White House to the Capitol where they killed a police officer. There was a conspiracy. So that's what I would do. The subpoenas would be flying out the door the second I became U.S. Attorney. But I would step back and let the apolitical, seasoned career prosecutors with more than one trial
right.
do the bidding.
Have you seen the video? There's been a video circulating that appears to show Trump Jr., and I apologize, I forget his Trump Jr.'s girlfriend, all watching what was going on.
Yeah, now I'm a defense lawyer now. I'm going to put this in a light most favorable to them. When
Okay.
Donald Trump Jr., who would be a subject if not a target, Kimberly Guilfoyle, I don't know much about her. She may be a witness. to be fair to them, they were watching sort of the march up to the Capitol. And the video that shows them laughing and giggling like 8-year-old kids, I think it was before they stormed the gates.
So my question there was, and I wasn't sure about, I mean, I agree. I think the timing is key there. But what I saw was there was either a fire truck or an ambulance in the front with their sirens on. So I'm not sure if that was related or unrelated to the incident.
Yeah.
That's why.
Here's the thing, David. If Trump had his inflammatory speech in front of the clips, and all he said was, let's show them who we are. Let's go demonstrate. And they went to the Capitol and they just surrounded the Capitol and they held up signs, Trump won, stop the steal, all that crazy talk. If all they did was that and yelled a few obscenities, which as someone from Connecticut worked in a lumberyard, that doesn't bother me.
Exactly.
But if that's all they did, there's no crime. Maybe there could be a couple trespass, but that's it.
Right.
But they were given marching orders, no pun intended, before this rally started. And with code language, Giuliani, who's a subject, if not a target, trial by combat.
I don't know if that's code. I don't know if that's code language. That seems pretty explicit to me.
Isn't that what's that Thrones?
Thrones?
What is it?
Game of Thrones?
Yeah, Game of Thrones. I didn't watch all the episodes, but that's code language. And they were given marching orders to go up there, and the guys with the zip ties, they were ready to kill people, and they did. They killed an officer of the law.
Right.
And I got to tell you, Trump has blood on his hands. Donald Jr., Giuliani, Josh Hawley, who raised his fist.
Right.
Ted Cruz, treason.
You know what I was reminded of was, I don't know if I think it must have been maybe 78 or 79 when the neo-Nazi party in Illinois, they wanted to march through Skokie. So, and there was a lawsuit over it because, Skokie is the home of.
Was that Brandenburg, the famous case of Brandenburg?
I'm not sure if it's Brandenburg, but it may have been Brandenburg, but Skokie was the home of, at that time, there was a big Holocaust survivor community, which is why the neo-Nazis wanted to march there to make their point. And there was of course a huge controversy over it. And the ACLU had, which was run by in Illinois, was run by a Jewish lawyer who defended the right of the neo-Nazis to march. Which I remember when I was a kid then, I remember thinking that's the right call, because if they're marching, that's what makes this country great. You can march and say whatever you want. And obviously, you can't cross the line into incitement, calls for violence, etc. But to your point, if you want to if you want to march to the Capitol and chant and say that you think the election is false as that is, fine. That's what this country is built on. But this clearly went further.
You know what? You asked me, well, how I would do it as a prosecutor, how I would investigate, I would go back to Donald Trump's comments. I think it was Saturday, August 12th, 2017. It was the day of, or maybe the day after, the infamous Charlottesville rally. Right. Take back the right or something like that. Jews will not replace us. That was the chant the day before on the lawn at UVA with tiki torches. All right. When he said there are good people on both sides, that was the beginning. That was the seeds that were planted, because Trump knew that if he didn't feed the beast, and the beast were his racist supporters, probably 25 to 30% of Trump's support are downright racist. The other 75, 70%, I can't explain that, but they like them or they tolerate them. But he planted the seeds way back in August of 2017, and history will show that's when Joe Biden made the decision to run for president.
Right.
Ironically. And fast forward to the first or second presidential debate when Trump said to the Proud Boys, stand down, stand by, because Trump knew he was going to probably lose the election. And he knew plan B was say it was stolen, saying I really run, and hopefully the violence will give me the job back. He was planting the seeds. And as a prosecutor, I would play those clips before a jury. And I got to tell you, if there is a trial of Donald Trump, and there should be, criminal, it can't be held in District of Columbia. It's going to have to be moved because the jury pool is going to be poisoned. But whatever jury you have, wherever, okay, those will be exhibits. His clips, his answers, his points of comments about the racist pigs, and that's what I would do if I was a prosecutor.
Yeah, I think this is I think this is the top 3 worst days in U.S. history.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. Oh, David. When I drove in here, I was talking to a buddy. He was in my wedding way back in '85. He recalls when he was in high school, 1974. He had a button at our high school. It said "Impeach Nixon," and he was the only kid. This is before he was impeached, but it was like April of '74. He had a button, "Impeach Nixon." He was the only kid in the high school that was following the whole Watergate thing.
Wow.
And he remembers one of his fellow students came up to him, who's a big Nixon supporter, and tried to rip it off. And I said to him, I go, when you put that button on in April of '74, that was so quaint. It was so quaint. We're talking about a botched burglary of the DNC in the Watergate Hotel. Whoop-de-doo.
Right. I mean, that's like literally like 10 to 11 on a Tuesday in this administration.
Absolutely. And I will say this. I thought Nixon was a crook. But if I had to negotiate a nuclear arms treaty or negotiate any treaty with another country, friend or foe, there is nobody I would rather have in that room than Richard Nixon. One, he's brilliant. And number 2, for all his faults, all his warts, he did try to do what he thought was best for the United States of America. Trump is a grifter. He's a narcissist, and everything he does is about him, about his brand. And that scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, no, I think these next, what is it? I guess next 10.
How many days?
What is it?
What's today?
Days. 8 days. It's the 12th. 8
days. He's got to be taken out. Legally. Legally, he has to be taken out. He really does.
Right. Well, listen, Gene, I want to thank you so much for coming on and joining me on my podcast. And it's great to see you.
Well, I got to add this. You and I worked on a case, opposite sides. We had the famous General Sekiba Kanute, who was president of the African Union, 54 nations. And you were a class act. We resolved it in a good way. And but the other thing I want to mention is I will be seeing you next week, right?
No, I'm there this week.
Oh, you're teaching at Harvard?
Yeah, I'm there this week. It's great. I mean, and it's always great to see you there. But of course, it's just not the same since it's remote this year.
Oh, well, I'm going to be calling you because it is. I'll teach next week. And I love those Harvard Law students, the 2nd and 3rd years.
Yeah,
they're brilliant kids. Brilliant kids.
No, it's still a great experience.
Have it. Be safe. Happy New Year.
You too. Same here.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us for White Collar Insider with David Benowitz. Join us next week for another look into white-collar crime, criminal justice issues, and more. Stay tuned for new episodes by subscribing to our show on all of your favorite streaming platforms.